Okay, so welcome back, Zoom. So my demonstration for today is live edge and natural edge bowls, and there is a difference. So a live edge bowl is one that the bark has stayed on. A natural edge bowl is one that Mother Nature said, nope, and the bark comes off. But you still get that natural curvature of the tree. So either of them are cool. I think everybody sets off to make a live edge bowl, but like I said, Mother Nature steps in and says no. So throughout the demo, I'm going to try to give you some tips on what I have found to be successful making a live edge bowl in my almost 30 years turning. So I've put those up on the paper there, and I'll kind of be touching on those as we go through. So first and foremost, the biggest tip I think is probably a winter harvest. You want to gather up your bowl blanks in the freezing months that we have here in northeastern Ohio. So that's primarily January and February. You might be able to squeak back into December, maybe sometimes March, although not March from this year, it was pretty warm. So January and February are going to be your best bet. The reason is because during the freezing months, the least amount of moisture is in the trees. Now, they're still green, they're still wet, but they might be a couple percentage points less than what they would be in the middle of summer. Anything you can do to help out the drying process is a good thing. Now, that's not to say that you can't make a live edge bowl in the middle of summer. Probably most of my stuff has been made in the summer. In fact, the burl second from the end there, I did that in September of last year. So you're going to have to use CA glue. You may have to use CA glue anyways to keep the bark on, but we'll talk about that in a little bit and talk about some of the negatives of using CA glue, which if you've looked at the bowls, you can probably see what I'm talking about. So yeah, if you go onto YouTube, you'll find probably a dozen different ways to make a live edge bowl. We are going to do my preferred method, which is starting with the bowl between centers. So I'll be using a two-prong drive spur, as opposed to, I didn't pull it out, but a four-prong drive spur. So a two-prong drive spur, because there's only 2 points digging into the wood, it's actually going to be a stronger hold than a four-prong drive spur. So I prefer this. So we're going to, first thing we need to do is we're going to set this up so that the bowl is, the bark is against the headstock. And I've got a cup center in the tailstock. Again, there's multiple different ways to do this. This is just the way I prefer to do it. So we're going to find center here in the on this piece. I think, oh, I did mark it, sort of. Make sure that is actually my mark. It can be a little difficult to mark out on bark. Yeah. All right, and then the next thing is we don't want to put our drive spur just into the bark itself. Bark is not very structurally strong. And if you get a good catch or something like that, or you're taking a heavy cut on the bowl, you could just spin the bark right on your drive spur and potentially lose the blank, come flying out. Of course, we don't want that. So, since this piece has some curve to it, and I just want to get down to solid wood. You can do this any way you like. For example, on these pieces that I cut out for the LET class, they're a little bit more uniform with the curvature of the bark. So, and this is a heavier bark. You can use a mallet and chisel. flat blade screwdriver, anything to get the bark just out of where your drive spur is going to go. Just get that seated in there. I just want to get it close. Okay. And now you can see we've got some pretty good wobble. So one of the other suggestions I would have when doing this is, again, like the pieces I created for the LET class, they're already round, they're pretty uniform. I did the best I could to get everything as nice and uniform and even as possible. So for the demo, I wanted to try to find something kind of unique. By my shop in Cleveland, like most cities have, they've started going through and kind of trimming some of the trees. So I've been driving past this tree since I was 19. I'm 51, never noticed it. Every single day of the week driving past this. Well, then they finally take it down, and I drive past one morning and I was like, ooh, what is that? I've never seen this wood before. It had a very, like a dark honey color and a very light sapwood. So Cleveland's just going to take the trees down and leave them. They're just going to rot there. So I saved them and made those little bowls. And as soon as I cut into it, I'm like, this is yellow. What is this? Did some research online, I found out that this is acacia. So, and if you've seen the big piece that I did here, you can understand why we don't really use acacia for wood turning. So I have since found out that although acacia, it turns very nicely, especially green, looks great, but it is very prone to cracking. It dries very unevenly, so we don't use it a lot. It's very waterproof. It is the hardest of all of our hardwoods that grow domestically here in the United States. And it's yellow, so it kind of has that exotic wood kind of feel to it. So I don't have high hopes that this bowl is going to survive, but it'll look nice for the demo. All right. What's next? So the next thing that we need to do is what's called balancing of the bark. The idea is that we want to get the highs. So this is the way the tree is growing out of the earth. So this is the curvature, the circle of the tree, just like this. We want to align the end grain to each other and then the side grain to each other as close as we can get. The goal being to make more of a utilitarian bowl, meaning that you're going to actually be using it. Doing that balancing of the bark will yield the deepest, most usable bowl you can create. So something like this is black locust. I turned this probably 25 years ago. I'm pretty proud that the bark stayed on. And you can see that it is definitely a usable bowl, and we do use this in our house. So the highs and lows of the bark are pretty even, giving you the nice full size, as opposed to this is more of an art bowl, somewhat usable. It's got some depth, but you're not going to really be able to hold much in it. Maybe your keys or wallet or something like that. But really, it's an art piece. It's meant to just sit on the shelf and look pretty, like a lot of you guys. All right. So, to balance the bark, I like to use my tool rest kind of as a pointer. And I can line up, we'll start with the end grain first. So I'm just going to kind of, now there's a lot of undulation in this, so I'm probably not going to be able to get it as close as something like this, but we'll try. And I'm just lining up as close as I can get to kind of find that sweet spot. That one and that one. And I can see I'll be quite a bit higher on this side. So all we're going to do is we're going to loosen the tailstock and we're going to shift this over half the distance of the amount of run out that we have. Reset that up. A little bit more. And this is one of the benefits. So I'm using a cup center on the tailstock. This is one of the benefits because it allows you to make these kind of micro adjustments as opposed to a more traditional cone style center where the cone, if you're just moving it like a 1/16 of an inch, the cones kind of want to go right back in its original hole. The cup center, since it's a ring that it creates, it allows you to just move over incremental little amounts. Okay. Now we'll do the same thing to the low sides of the bark. And actually, I think we're within a 1/16 of an inch there. So I think we're going to leave that. We'll go ahead and finish tightening it up. And unfortunately, I think I got my drive spur a little bit off center, but we'll fix that. And the next pro tip that I can offer up is starting with a round blank. You don't necessarily have to do this, but the goal of this project being to keep the bark on. If you start with a blank that's round and running more true than this, that's less turning that you're going to have to do across this bark. The less you have to touch the bark, the more of a chance there's going to be that it stays on. So on a nice round blank like this, if we get this running true, you're just going to take the minimal cut off of the bark to get the shape of the bowl that you want. That's kind of the goal. All right, so I think we're good there. Make sure it's nice and tight. So the first thing that I'm going to do turning-wise is I want to flatten off the bottom so I can get a good surface to scribe for my chuck. So I got my bowl gouge. So I'm going to show you two methods for flattening off the bottom. This first method, can you guys hear me okay with this down? Okay. My first method, my bowl gouge is fairly open, and what I'm trying to do is ride the left wing bevel. I'm going to present it to the bowl, but I'm letting the high spots of the bowl come to my bowl gouge. I'm not really pressing in. And I'm just floating in and out. So this is kind of like a shear cut, I guess you would call it. And I can feel when it's flat because I'm not getting any bounce. So right here in the middle where I want my tenon to be, I think that we are flat enough. This is going to be since I don't have it running very true, it's probably going to be closer to a 9-inch bowl. So I want to go a heavy third on that size for my foot. So I'm going to start with probably about 3.5, 3.25, something like that. So I'm using my dividers, and I'm going to scratch a line to represent only touching the bowl with my left leg, never touching it with the right. We touch it with the right, the wood's going to catch it, and then it's going to stab you right in the eye. You don't want to do that. All right, so now I have a representation of where my tenon will be. So now I'll show you method number 2, which is going to be more of a typical bowl gouge cut, where we're going to be, our flute is going to be facing the tailstock, and we're going to be riding the bevel straight in. My goal is to keep the bevel as perpendicular to the bedways as I can. And once I get that cut started, I call it turning up the throttle to open that flute a little bit to make a better cut. So that establishes kind of the overall height or length of my tenon. Now I want to take one more thinner cut. And I'm going to stop just a little bit shy of the previous cut. That establishes the face where my chuck jaws will mount against. And you can see the acacia wood's pretty fibery, but as long as you have nice sharp tools, it cuts pretty well. All right, so I use a dovetail chuck. So we're going to create a dovetail angle here and then an undercut face on this short little stub. So to do that, I use everybody's favorite tool, the skew. I'll raise my tool rest up a little bit. Now, my skew I have sharpened so that I can create not only my dovetail angle, but the undercut of this face all in one shot. So that looks like this. And it just gets that very pointy toe of the skew right down into that corner. And take some of this length off now. There we go. Now, if you're having any sorts of problems with keeping your bowl blank in your chuck, if you've launched a bowl blank or anything like that, this is probably the issue. If this face is where you get all the strength of your chucking surface, the face of the chuck jaws seating securely against this face is where all the strength comes from. The angle of your dovetail is really not real important. The strength of your chuck jaws clamping down on that wood are going to crush it into the shape that it wants. But it's seating securely against this face. So I think of this face, it's just like when we finish a bowl and you create a concave or a dished surface on the bottom of the bowl so it sits securely and flat on a table, this is the exact same thing. You're creating this undercut or this slight dish so that it seats completely flat against the chuck jaws. That's important. So we'll come back to that when we get to the stage where we flip this around. All right, so we're good there. Now we can start making some real cuts. Now, I do the push cut method of bowl turning, which means that my bowl gouge is going to be pretty close to horizontal, and I'm literally just pushing straight in towards the headstock. This action forces the bowl gouge to find its own bevel, and it will ride at an angle across that bevel. So I don't have to really control it, it just does its own thing. So let's see how that looks. And all I'm doing is just pushing straight in. So this is a 40-40 grind. So the nose is at 40 degrees and the cutting edge is at 40 degrees. This is a typical push-cut bowl gouge. But this particular cut, this push cut, will work with any type of bowl gouge, whether it's a standard grind, an Ellsworth grind, on and on and on. So this is a good point to kind of talk about grain-supported cuts. So I've done a lot of demos for the club, and I've done a lot of LET classes and helped out with a lot of LET classes. And one of the things that I notice is, I think it might be human nature, a lot of people, when you make the outside shape of the bowl, they're starting from the headstock side or the rim of the bowl and working down to the tailstock. So, not that that doesn't work, and I can speak from experience, up until about 5 or 6 years ago, that was what I did. Turn from the rim down and sand the hell out of the bowl and fix all of the torn grain and everything like that. So turning this direction is actually incorrect. If you look at the nature of wood, I think we can all agree, and I have a visual aid, wood is just a bunch of straws sticking out of the earth, right? Okay. So let me kind of reshape this into sort of a bowl shape so you can get a little bit better idea. So this is what we're going for, this kind of shape. When you take your bowl gouge from the rim down, you are turning against the grain or creating an unsupported cut. And what that means is each of these fibers, instead of cleanly cutting them, you're pushing them because there's no support behind them. You can see that each of the straws or each of the bits of grain is shorter as you go. So the previous straw, if I can make this a little bit longer, is being bent because there's nothing behind it to support it, which results in torn grain on the end grain. All right? Now, if we go the other direction, and we're coming up this way, each fiber that you cut, the fiber directly behind it is longer. So you're pushing this fiber, and it's pushing it against the wall of the next fiber so you can cut it cleanly. So this method, going from the tailstock up around the bowl, if you don't do that way, try it. It's going to feel weird, but it will produce a spectacular finish with no torn grain. No torn grain means less sanding, right? Okay. So, coming up and around the bowl, and you can see already, this is just a little bit that I've done. This is a superior finish. There should be all sorts of torn grain here, and it's super smooth. All right? Okay. We'll get to that here in just a minute. So we have to kind of modify our angle of approach a little bit. All right, so let's progress a little bit further. I don't want to go too much further with this because we're getting into the bark, and that's a whole nother story. Yes. So as we're pushing in, I'm starting off with my flute. If our bowl is the face of a clock, I'm probably at about 10 o'clock, so facing off this way. And I'm not worried about the 3/4 of an inch of run out here. We'll get that all cleaned up as we progress. So now, since this is going to be more of a shallow bowl, getting to your question here, the push cut gets more and more difficult because you've got the tailstock in the way. Now, the one-way tailstock is pretty thin. I can actually get pretty close. But my robust at home is much bigger. I can't really get much more than what I've already done at home on my lathe. So, to change that, we're simply going to drop the handle and we're going to guide the tool a little bit more, but as soon as we can, we're going to lift the handle to get back into our push cut.
What I generally do you ever cut a tenon in the bark side, switching around, and then you can look real quick?
So that was what I was talking about, the other possible methods of doing it. That is a great method. What he's talking about is starting with the bowl bark side on the tailstock, creating a tenon through the bark so you can turn it around and then chuck the bark side. Then that gets the tailstock completely out of the way. Yeah, and I could still do that. Yeah, because I got the tenon here and I know it's running true the way I want it. Yeah, so that's certainly an option. All right. So handle a little bit lower. Let's take a look. So we still got a ways to go to get this cleaned up, but I'm liking this. Even though it's not an ideal cut, I'm still cutting the grain in the right direction, so the finish is perfect. Other than the tool marks, but tool marks sand out pretty easy. Now, on a natural edge bowl, again, the goal being keeping the bark on. Everything I just said about grain direction and cutting this way. For this project, you kind of have to break that rule now. So if I were to continue cutting in the correct grain direction, as I get to the bark, I'm actually cutting under the bark and potentially pushing it right off of the piece of wood. So for right here, this cut, from the bark rim down to what I've just created, I need to go this way, the incorrect way. But I'm going to try to keep the sides pretty vertical, so I'm really cutting parallel to the center line, which if you're cutting this direction or this direction, it's kind of the same because the fibers are still perpendicular to your cut. So we'll see what happens. And this is where I was saying earlier about starting with a round blank. I'm kind of screwing with that because I didn't get my drive spur centered enough. But it's a demo and you get distracted. Just out of curiosity, let's see how bad it is. Yeah, I still got a little bit more to go, but it's not bad. Just going to kind of blend this first 1.5 inches in, and I think we might, this is a little too flat for my taste, so I might take this edge back a little bit, but. There we go. Still a little flat here on the bottom, but I think for demonstration purposes, I think we're good. And when we come back around to finish the foot, I can kind of reshape that a little bit better. But, okay. So again, tool marks and stuff like that, I'm not worried about. Tool marks stand out very easily. It's torn grain that's more difficult. And I can see, I don't know if you guys can see that in the camera. We're starting to lose the bark right here. But it is what it is. Okay, so at this point, if I was happy with the bottom shape, we'd sand the crap out of it. We're not going to do any sanding today. Take this all the way to your finish, 400, 600 grit, whatever you take it to. All right? So now we can go ahead and turn it around. It is, yeah, very green. Not today. So I would power sand it, and when I sand stuff that's wet like this, I'll power sand it, and then I have one of those rubber sanding cleaners. Just clean sand to get the finish that I'm looking for. So I just had to redo the threads on my lathe spindle because I got in the habit of loosening my chuck and then throwing it in reverse real quick and then and I think one too many times right at that last thread I just kind of moved with the chuck. Got that chuck stuck on there like you know what, and I ended up having to use a pipe wrench with a cheater bar and just destroyed the first two threads on my spindle. So I have a Robust, so I called Robust and said, just out of curiosity, how much is a new spindle? Well, we don't sell just the spindle. You have to send us the whole assembly. We will disassemble it, replace the spindle, fit the bearings, run everything in, blah, 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 so that you're getting back a warranted product. Yeah, well, it actually isn't that bad. So Brent, the owner of Robust, said that service for them, the shaft was $300, the new spindle, and then the whole installation with new bearings if I wanted them, I was looking at somewhere $850 or so. More than I wanted to spend, but I was anticipating $2 or $3 grand, given the price that I paid for the lathe. Luckily, I was able to, and as you guys probably know, I'm a machinist, so I was able to fix it. It took me a couple days of hand filing and testing and got the chuck stuck again, but I finally got it, and now everything is good. So another tip that's on there, don't power your chuck off. Turn it off by hand. I speak from experience. Okay. Interestingly enough, I'm not the first guy to call Robust asking this question. And in talking with the owner, he said what's funny is every time this has happened has been with a Vicmark chuck. And he says he thinks that Vicmark is hardening their thread adapters, so it's just a little bit harder than the spindle material that he's using. So, all right, so back to our undercut face. So this is where it comes into play. This is, imagine that the chuck jaws are your table, and this bowl is sitting, and we want it to be as secure as possible. So there my chuck is loose, and just holding it tight, I can't feel any wiggle or any movement. And that's because of that undercut face. A perfect 90-degree face is good, but I strongly recommend an undercut face so that you've really just got a 1/16 of an inch of that face that's really contacting your chuck jaws. Oh, got to drill a hole first. Okay, so we're going to do a depth hole. Now, determining depth on a natural edge bowl can be difficult. It's really important to pick one area and always measure from that. So we'll go with the highest spot on my bark. And since I don't really have a frame of reference here, I'm going to use my tool rest. So I'm going to turn that spot over here. So McMaster-Carr, my favorite supply house. So this is a drill collar, drill bit collar, and it normally comes with a set screw. So then I just ordered a matching knob. So I've got my adjustment right there, rather than the O-ring or rubber band that I would have usually used. And this is every demonstrator's worst nightmare. You don't want to be the guy that made a funnel. So making sure everything is clear, everything's locked down. Now to get rid of all the waste material on the inside, again I'm doing a push cut. So now we are doing the same thing that we did on the outside, but now my flute is pointed to the 2 o'clock direction. And I'm starting in the middle, and all I'm gonna do is just push straight in. It will automatically cut a V shape for me. And I'm just gonna step that out till I get to my last cut, which will establish my wall thickness. I'm gonna take this down in segments, maybe 3/4 to an inch at a time. Make sure my wall thickness is right and my finish is good. Then we'll just repeat on the next layer and just keep taking it down in layers. So that looks like this. And hopefully you can see, so you can see the little V's that I'm creating down in the middle. And what that does is, my goal is just getting the wood out of the way. But then when I do the next layer, all I gotta do is just poke right into that previous V and just keep following them down to the center till I get to the bottom of my depth hole. This is definitely the hardest part, especially with such an uneven outside bark surface. Just getting through that interrupted cut of the bark down into the more solid wood. Okay, now I've got 1/2 inch or so until I get to my final wall thickness. I'm gonna shoot for around 1/4 inch, nothing crazy. So as I'm getting closer and closer, I'm gonna change my angle of approach from straight in. I'm gonna sweep the handle kind of away from me. What I wanna do is, I'm trying to make the bevel of my bowl gouge parallel to the outside surface. Whether you've got a straight-sided bowl or it's flared open or it's an undercut rim, making that bevel of your bowl gouge parallel so you get a nice uniform wall thickness. This is a little bit easier on a natural edge bowl because of the interrupted cut. You can see your bowl gouge deeper in than if this was a regular solid bowl. So it makes it a little bit easier, I think. And once I'm in there, I can sweep my handle a little bit towards me. Well, that's about 3/8 or so. So we lost our bark right there. Sorry, guys. So this is a good time to talk about CA glue. So the method I'm doing is the method I've done for almost 30 years of turning. And I've been completely successful until this wood. So we'll skip to number 9. Acacia equals bad. So acacia dries very ununiformly. Some areas of the wood dry quicker than others, and it dries very quickly. So you can see just in, I cut this yesterday, sealed it and everything, just overnight, now I'm starting to lose some of the bark. Now on my 3 small bowls that are there, the bark, it's a branch, so bark is much thinner, not so gnarly. It's a smoother bark, so it definitely held on completely. So one of the things that I do is when I have finished the outside of the bowl, the previous stage, I will saturate the bark completely all the way around with CA glue, even though it's wet. Then at this stage, as I get deeper and deeper, I'll keep reapplying glue until I get the complete bark rim completely turned, and I've still got material in the bottom, and I will saturate that with CA glue, give it a couple minutes to dry, and it has worked beautifully for me for all these years. But not on this. So yeah, thin CA glue, so it really just soaks right in. But one of the nice things I did find about this, because it is such a light colored wood, even though the CA glue, I could see it bleeding into the adjacent wood, it didn't really stain it. All 4 of those pieces I did with this procedure, and other than sanding, you can't see where the CA glue has bled in. So that was good about it. All right, so let's keep going. Now we're back into the center, same V-cuts. Speed things up a little bit. Okay. And all I'm looking for is to make sure that my finish looks good. Again, I'm not worried about tool marks. I just want that finish to be no torn grain. And we're good. Looks like I'm going to lose a little more bark, but we'll see. So rinse and repeat. Same V-cuts. A little bit too heavy. So this is telling me, because I'm cutting the same, almost 1/4 of an inch at each cut, and now my bowl gouge is starting to have a little difficulty. So that tells me that my bowl gouge is getting a little dull. And again, I'm using a 40-40 grind. So Tom was the last demo, I think, right? So I know this is set at 40. Much better. And hopefully you notice I'm starting to create this curve as I'm getting deeper and deeper into the bowl. Good. Okay, so now we're completely through the bark and now we're all just into solid wood. So that's good. We've got, looks like about an inch left to go. No, maybe not even an inch. Half or so. So one of the things that, I don't know if you guys have difficulty with this, but I have difficulty with it, getting a reference on the outside of the bowl for my depth. The usual, you know, holding it like that and then eyeballing on the outside. With a natural edge bowl, that can be really tough because of the undulating surface on the outside. So I came up with this little guy. So it kind of incorporates the typical depth gauge. I did get fancy and I added lines for inch and half inch and some numbers and things like that. So if you have a nice even bark surface, you can rest it against there. Unfortunately, I don't, so I'm just gonna go by this high spot that we've been doing all along, and I'm about 2 inches exactly right there. Now, if I go like this, I can see, so I've still got quite a bit of material left. But what if I want to be exact? So I came up with this. I got magnets in each end. Now I've got a wiggly exact reference point. So the inside edge of this is exactly where the depth is on the inside. So this is, it's not $1 million idea, but it might be $100 idea.
Go to Shark Tank.
Yeah. So you guys are more than welcome to do this yourself. I don't, everything I come up with, you guys can take. It doesn't matter to me. Why? So you could heckle me? Okay, so same thing again. Now we should be able to get to the bottom of that hole. Yep, right there. I'm still going to keep with my V-cuts. I'm just going to, as I'm coming around the curve, around in this area, I'm just going to kind of just take less and less depth. Pick up that cut. Okay. All right, so I've still got a ways to go. But we're getting to the stage in the bowl where we're starting to need to curve in across the bottom of the bowl. So every bowl gouge does not do a great job once you start making that turn. Whether it's a 40-40 grind, the Ellsworth, the standard grind, whatever. Bowl gouges are really designed to slice through end grain. It's all about the end grain. To produce the cleanest surface again with no tear out, we need to change up our bowl gouge a little bit to what's called a bottom bowl gouge. And in kind of learning about the push cut and having two distinct bowl gouges for making these, I have really started to understand that bowl turning is just spindle turning. It's just turned on its side. This is still a spindle. My grain is going this way or vertical this way. And on the inside of a bowl, we are just creating a cove. Just like on a spindle, you're cutting from the high spot down to the low, high spot down to the low. That's what we're doing in here. So when you're cutting with a normal bowl gouge and you're making that turn to go across the bottom of the bowl, you're running right into those end grain fibers. And that's where a bowl gouge is not good. It's just, that's not the job for a bowl gouge. But a spindle roughing gouge does that spectacularly. But you're not supposed to use a spindle roughing gouge in a bowl. We all know that. So a bottom bowl gouge is a very miniature spindle roughing gouge. The face angle is not perfectly square like a spindle roughing gouge. It's tipped back just a little bit just to get the wings out of the way. But it's got the same bevel grind underneath, but on this we've got a micro bevel. So I've got these two grinds to get the steel out of the way, and my actual cutting edge is only about a 1/16 of an inch long bevel all around there. And it's ground very much the same way that you would grind your spindle roughing gouge by hand, just kind of rotating across the grinding wheel. The actual cutting bevel is about 50 degrees. So this is presented very horizontal, and trying to think, when was, it doesn't matter, whatever. Okay, so I want to be cutting on center, pretty much horizontal. This is a light duty cut. We're not taking heavy amounts of material. That's why it's only used for the bottom third of the bowl. So let's see how that looks. Once I get through all the V's, it'll be a little bit smoother. So I'm trying to go as slow as possible and just let the bowl gouge do its job. I'm not really trying to push it really hard. Right there to center. Now let's take a look. And I don't know if you guys can get that well enough on the camera, but it is perfect, zero torn grain the whole way around. That's the beauty of these particular types of grinds. This, I brought my scrapers just in case, but this will actually give me a better surface finish than my scrapers. So, give it a try. Now, before I go too far, 'cause I don't want to be that guy that creates a funnel. So I've still got about 3/4 of an inch of depth. So over here at the edge, yeah, I'm somewhere 2 to 3 o'clock, probably not quite 3 o'clock, to pick up that cut on the curve. But then once I get it good enough, I'm somewhere between 12 and 1 o'clock. It's almost perfectly vertical. And you can play around with the position of that, you know, kind of turning in, bringing your handle back towards you a little bit, or even sometimes when you're on the curve, your handle's going to be away from you a little bit. Okay, plenty of meat still. Famous last words, right? The one thing I will say about any of the bottom bowl gouges is it wants to dig into that wood. You almost have to kind of hold it back like a dog on the leash. It's like I'm sticking up a little bit in the middle there. That's better. I try not to really make anything flat on my pieces, but on a wider, squattier bowl like this, you almost can't help on the inside but come down and be basically flat across the middle. So I think that that's good. And I think when we turn it around to do the foot, I am going to shape this a little bit, give it a little more angle, and there's enough wood there, I think, that we can do that. Yeah. Finish looks good. And the overall curve, I think, is good. So yeah, at this point, do any more gluing that you might need to do. Yeah, this bark is it's gonna come off. But But even still, without the bark, it's got a pretty good natural edge because the sapwood is so creamy white. It still look pretty cool, but I'll leave it on just so you guys can see it. So somebody had a question about a scraper. Let me just see what we can do with the finish. Negative rake scraper. A little lump in there. One more cut. I think we're good there. So now, just like what we were doing on the outside, I would sand this all the way to my finish, 400 or 600 grit, whatever you're gonna do. Make sure that the glue is all secured, or the bark is all secured with glue. And then we can turn it around and make a foot. All right, so methods of turning this around so that you can do the foot. So obviously, a vacuum chuck is like the Cadillac version. But I wanted to show an alternative method if you don't have the coin to get your own vacuum chuck system. Cold jaws won't really work on most natural edge or live edge bowls. Obviously, ones like this, there's really no way to grab that with cold jaws safely. The smaller ones you may be able to. This one, possibly. The bigger the tree is overall, the flatter this is going to be. So it kind of all depends on the size of the tree when you start. So an alternative method is simply to make some sort of a drive, something or other that you can just bump the piece of wood against. So that's what I have, and this is actually probably the method that I use the most. I have a vacuum chuck, but it makes me a little nervous. Just letting air pressure hold my piece on that I have probably spent several days to make. So I kind of revert to this. I'm always more comfortable having something pinched between centers than I know it can't go anywhere. So I just have a couple different shapes and things for whatever I'm doing. I needed a little bit bigger one for this, so I think this was for turning ladles, but it still works. And then I get some foam craft paper as my backup. Gives it a little bit of squish and a little bit of grip. And I'm just going to push the bowl up against there with the tailstock. So we'll get our live center put back in there. And this is where having that original center point still there comes in really handy, because then I can get everything right back in the same center I had to start with, and hopefully we're running sort of true enough. There we go. And we can get enough pressure. I'm just looking for it so that it's not slipping on my drive piece, and that's pretty good there. And I don't think I'm distorting the bowl, so I think we're good there as well. So those of you that know me and you know the types of pieces that I bring in for the show and tell table, I'm a big believer in putting a foot on everything I make. That's one of the reasons I like to have a tenon, because it gives me that little extra wood to turn into a foot. And I do not like things to have just a flat bottom. My dad, who was also a hobby woodworker like me, taught me all flat work and everything when I was a kid. And he told me that everything looks better on a pedestal. So the foot gives the pieces just a little bit of elevation off of the table. Depending on the type of foot that you make, it creates a shadow line. If George was here as an architect, he would tell you, yeah, shadow lines are great. It separates the bowl from the table or shelf and just kind of elevates it. So, all right, so this is my process for making a foot. So back to my regular bowl gouge. And I know I've got plenty of thickness in there. Faster. So my first cut is back to that facing off cut. My tenon's a little bit too long. I don't want my foot to be quite that long. Tall, either way. One more. Now this last cut, I'm going to start creating my undercut foot, concave, dished, however you want to refer to it. Make sure we're dished enough. Yep. And then from here, I'm just going to be making a slight little arching motion to take the dovetail angle off and create kind of this curved foot. And also reduce the overall diameter of the tenon. I also follow the golden ratio, try to on everything I do, so we want that foot to be a third of our overall diameter. I don't have my tape measure, but I'm thinking that's probably about 9 inch. So a 3-inch foot, we're 2 3/4, close enough. Just returning this like I was telling you to not make it so flat on the bottom. It's a little better. It's a little lumpy, but I think that'll be good. No torn grain, so we're good there. All right, now the last step, well, I would sand all of this, and one of the reasons I like this particular shaped foot is because if you power sand, it works great. Your power sanding disc will fit right into that little curved foot that we made, and it'll just make it even better. and you can get rid of all the tool marks and all that jazz. So then my last step, so I have a purpose-built tool. This was my first wood turning tool set. This is just, it's garbage steel, but for this little task it does beautifully. So I've ground the tip into a spear point and it's pretty much 90 degrees. So after I've completely sanded this, my goal is to create these last details using this and then not have to do any more sanding. So I resharpen this and it hasn't touched wood yet. I'm gonna line up this wing, this side of the angle, with the bottom of my bowl, which should put this wing parallel to the bedways. And right at the top of my foot, I'm just going to plunge in and basically scrape in a little shadow line. And then just drag it out to blend that out. Beautiful. And if everything is nice and sharp, you shouldn't have to do maybe 400 grit sandpaper right there just to define that detail. Then, I read somewhere, probably in Richard Raffin's books or videos when I was first turning, that as a wood turner you should always do some detail to the bottom of your pieces to make it obvious that you actually turn the bowl. And I think that, especially nowadays, I don't know if you guys are on social media or anything, and on Instagram, there's a lot of younger turners, and they're just sanding on a big belt sander the bottom of their bowls. Totally flat, totally boring, and then putting some brand on it, and I'm like, this is, you're half-assing it. So I come in, and I basically just scrape a little circle, little V cut, step over a little bit, create another one, sometimes two. This is a little bit bigger of a bowl, let's do 3. Make sure they're all nice and even. And if everything is right, we need to do a little bit of sanding on that, but that's easy sanding. You guys get the idea. So, did I get through all my tips? Oh, the pointy bowl gouge. Sorry, I forgot that one. Okay, so one of the things that I like about the 40/40 grind is that it creates a very pointy tip. Going back 20 minutes ago, when I was making my initial cut, establishing my wall thickness, this works very well. That pointy tip slices right through that bark and into the solid wood without damaging the bark. So that's one thing that is different about this particular grind versus, say, an Ellsworth grind. Yes, the tip is pointy and sharp, but overall it's more rounded on the tip, so you're getting more tool steel surface that's contacting the wood when you make that cut. This is, and when we're all done here, you feel free to come up and take a look at it. It is very pointy. Okay, paper bag and wet chips. So again, my process at this stage is once it's all sanded, it's basically completely done. I would grab up a whole bunch of the wet wood chips, do the paper bag and wood chip thing, and I have had 100% success until that bowl. But I think, again, that's more the wood than it is my process. The other option is you can let this dry with your dovetail tenon still on. Using this method, it doesn't really matter how much distortion the bowl has when it's drying. You should still be able to get it centered enough that you can turn your foot there at the end. Because one of the downsides is, now these two little bowls are fully dry and totally stable. This, I'm sorry guys, I said I wasn't going to move around that much. So this more of a bird's mouth style bowl I did have the pith running right through it, so that's why it's cracked so bad. But I think even still, I would have gotten a lot of warpage on this foot. So this would have been a good candidate, and I don't think I have the thickness left in it to go back and jam chuck this and return this flat. It just kind of is what it is. So that would be a good thing to let it fully dry and then come back when it's dry to finish off this foot. That's a good option. Obviously, again, a vacuum chuck works beautifully, gives you complete access of the foot without the tailstock in the way. So then we have our little nub that's still left. So what I do with that is I pull out the 80 grit tool, and I either hold this by hand or I set it on my bench with some towels, and I basically take 80 grit, get it 90% of the way down, and then just progress through my grits. Take me about 3 minutes to work through everything. Finish off by hand with some 400, sanding with the grain, and then that's it. Okay, so that is natural edge or live edge bowl turning in a nutshell.